And finally, there are other aspects that impact a person's decision whether to vote or not. Number one are attitude changes. So someone may view their vote as an important aspect to their identity. They may see themselves that voting is very important, and so that drives them to vote or not. The second is voter mobilization. So political parties and campaigns spend a good deal of time and money and all aspects of resources trying to get people not only to vote for them, but to actually get them to turn out at the polls on election day, or to send in their absentee ballot. This is called party voter mobilization. It's also the case that those that we've seen over time, that when people are less connected to others in their communities, they don't see, they aren't a part of the larger society. They're not belonging to groups or clubs. They may not see their vote as mattering, especially in a local elections, and so that may lead them not to vote. And finally, we can't, of course, take into account that there are costs and benefits to voting. So you may want to vote all that you as you may really, really want to vote, but you simply don't have the time. And you'll see from the weekly assignment, the video that you're going to watch for the weekly assignment this week, that this is actually a very real calculation for many. And there are a number of techniques that have been used by states and by local entities to try to depress or decrease voter turnout in those areas, particularly for some groups of people and not others. And so that can be a major high cost to voting, not just the time, but also the barriers that are put in place to prevent people from voting. Nevertheless, people do see an intrinsic value of voting, and it's one of the cornerstones of democracy. Now that we've looked at who votes and who doesn't, we can take a look at how people make decisions about whom to vote for. The single biggest predictor about how someone is going to vote is their party that they belong to. All right, and what this graphic shows is you can look at strong Democrats on the left and people who identify as strong Republicans on the right. And so what we see is that 94% of people who identify as strong Democrats voted for Barack Obama back in 2008 versus 96% of people who identify as strong Republicans voted for John McCain. We, Even among all other Republicans and among all Democrats, anyone who tends to identify with one party or the other, they're going to vote for that party's candidate. Okay, and so this is just a very clear inside look at even people who say, well, I kind of lean to a Republican, or I might be an independent Republican. By and large, if they have any sort of identifying factor, if they identify in any sort of way to any political party, they're going to vote for that party's candidate. And so that's the biggest factor that impacts how people are going to vote. And here we have a slide that looks at how different groups voted in the 2016 presidential election. Blue represents voters, those who voted for the Democrat candidate, and red identifies those who voted for the Republican candidate, which is President Trump. So what we see here is that 54% of women and 41% of men voted for Hillary Clinton, okay? While 52% of men and 41% of women voted for President Trump. Now, let's jump down. This is just looking at one aspect of individuals' identities. It's not looking at the intersectional nature, all right? So if we take a look at race, for example, 89% of African Americans voted for Hillary Clinton, while 8% voted for President Trump. And so when researchers take a closer look at this and examine African American women and African American men and white women and white men, what they actually find is some very distinct differences. So even though 54% of women voted for Hillary Clinton, that was actually driven by African American women who overwhelmingly voted for Hillary Clinton. And so if you break out and you look at the percent of white women whom they voted for, the majority voted for President Trump. And so that is discussion question number 2. what party did most white women, which candidate in 2016 did the majority of white women vote for in the 2016 election, and what percentage which candidate in 2016 did the larger percentage of African American women vote for in the 2016 presidential elections? All right, let's look at some other differences here. Let's look at income. Okay, as income increases, it appears that what we tend to see is that people who make less than $50,000 tend to vote more Democrat. People who make over that tend to, it's kind of close, vote more Republican. If we looked at this, disaggregated this even more, we would see some more differences. Okay, education is another interesting thing. So those who have high school or less are voting more Republican. Those who have some college vote Democrat or Republican, evenly split. Those with a college degree tend to vote more Republican, while those with more education, more than a college degree, tend to vote overwhelmingly so more Democratic. At least they did in 2016. And we can look at age. Young voters, unsurprisingly, tend to be more liberal. And in 2016, the voters between 18 and 20 voted Democrat. And as you work your way through, after 45, we see a larger share of Republican voters. It's unclear what 2020 is going to look like, especially with a lot of uncertainty facing us. There's a lot of questions out there right now about how people are going to make it to the polls, especially in light of the coronavirus and all the uncertainties about what's going to lie ahead. Next week, we're going to talk about the Electoral College and presidential elections. So hang on to your hats. It's going to be a good time.